Hey, and welcome back. I'm Rob, aka ShipDriver71, and today we are going to do my first semi-successful landing of the TFDi Design Boeing 717. Now I have to say somewhat successful because the first attempt was a horrible failure, because I accidentally set the MCU to take keyboard input, and thus disabled key commands to the simulator. In other words, not only did things like Z to kill the autopilot not work, but even P for pausing the sim didn't even work. Amazingly, I got the plane down, but this was not at all pretty. To be honest, this approach that you're seeing here isn't the greatest either, but I did have some navigational difficulties, starting with the fact that I didn't see any approaches in the MCU when I was doing the flight planning, other than the DME approaches, which frankly, I don't even see those in the charts. What I should have done was use the scroll up and down keys on the MCU to see the ILS, RNAV, and localizer approaches. Kinda stupid of me. But I am used to the page keys like on the 737. Anyway, I tried to do an ILS landing just by manually tuning the nav radio, but unfortunately, and I'm not quite sure why yet, so the DME lines on the map display were coincidentally or not 10 degrees off as well, which kind of faked me out for a minute, even though I really didn't need the DME lines to do a good approach. So I ended up exiting the autopilot and hand flying the approach earlier than I planned.
Landing gear.
Another thing that may or may not be a coincidence is the fact that magnetic variation here at Hilo is 9.5 degrees east, which is pretty close to 10 degrees. So there may be an issue with magnetic variation in how this aircraft figures out where's where. The flight's only about half an hour from Honolulu, so you know gyro drift is not really a factor. So something that bears further investigation. One can see the True Glass implementation, which was developed by TFDi with the rain effects on the windows. I had experienced this on the Milviz 310R Redux, but this aircraft adds windshield wipers to the equation. Very cool. It doesn't seem to have any noticeable impact on frames on my system as well. In many ways, one discovers when flying it, though, that this is not really a finished product. System depth is much higher on the iFly 737NG, and even higher yet on the PMDG birds and the Mad Dog. There are simply a lot of MCU functions that are unavailable, and certain things like changing the flight plan seem a little wonky, like having to initialize a new flight plan in order to change the stars or approaches, or even divert to a new airfield for that matter. Also, the auto throttle really liked to hunt while in cruise and descent as well. Just a constant up and down sound coming from the engines. And the lateral autoflight is not as smart and smooth as the more advanced add-ons from iFly, PMDG, and Leonardo. Then again, maybe the real 717 is like that. I'm not really sure. Nonetheless, hand flying it is a wonderful experience. Now, as far as performance goes, I found that overall it was fairly similar to my iFly 737 and my PMDG birds. One big difference is that there seems to be a much higher load on the GPU as opposed to the CPU. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this is a GPU limited aircraft, at least on my system with a 1070 Ti. And I think that is due to there is a lot of 3D modeling in the virtual cockpit on this aircraft. I mean, little wires and all kinds of stuff are 3D modeled, and I think that is a big part of why the GPU load is quite a bit higher. It's not running super high resolution textures. In fact, I think they're 1024. So, but definitely, this is I consider this GPU limited on my system rather than CPU limited, which is where I find myself with most of the other advanced aircraft add-ons. As I said, though, overall performance is fairly similar to the 737 and my PMDG aircraft. Although I will say, for example, with the 737 from iFly, that I do get maybe 1 or 2 extra frames, and definitely a marginal but noticeable amount of smoothness better than this aircraft. But I think that is because of the fact that the GPU is basically maxed out when I am flying this. Sharp-eyed observers might have noticed during this landing roll that I didn't really use the thrust reversers. That's because on this particular approach, I discovered that my reverser axis on my throttle didn't really work for this. So now F1, F2 keys work well, and I actually mapped some keys to some buttons to those. So since following approaches, I've actually had good success using the thrust reversers on this, and they're quite useful actually. The exterior is excellent as well, with a lot of detail. One thing that kind of separates this from other aircraft is that visually there's a very strong reflected sunlight on the aircraft's skin. I'm not 100% convinced that this replicates true sunlight reflecting on glossy painted aluminum, but it avoids the unrealistically almost matte look of many airliner add-ons. My only real knock on the exterior model is that the compressor blade animation for the engines is fairly cheesy. The virtual cockpit is frankly gorgeous, although I will say that it lacks any meaningful patina, so that it does look factory fresh. Whether that is an issue or not is completely personal, but it is noteworthy. The 3D modeling of the windows mechanisms is fantastic, and there are a lot of details that are modeled in 3D that many other developers would skip, like breakers and wires. The windows themselves do also have a surface sort of that is not perfectly clean, which can be seen at certain angles as well. Visually, I really can't fault anything in the VC. I have to say overall that I do really enjoy the plane despite some flaws. Keep in mind that this is a community beta version. The 717 itself was not built in large numbers, which is probably why you don't see it too often in the flight sim world. But virtually every one built is still in service because the operators love them. And frankly, the whole MD 80-90 series aircraft, I love that form factor, and I love the fact that you've got one here that has modern avionics. One touch that I really like is the iPads in the cockpit for functions like doors and ground power, weights and system state, and other functions. It allows one to get away from the contrivance of made-up menus in the MCU. So, although I do find issues with this, and I do see this as not really a finished product, I really do like the airplane, actually. It's great for short hops. I love doing island hopping in the Hawaiian Islands, and guess what? Hawaiian operates 717s. It's perfect. It's a match made in heaven. So, I really do like the aircraft. Despite some of the issues, and maybe some of the issues are actually me, because frankly I am very inexperienced with this. A lot of the buttonology is different than what you find on, say, a 737 or 757s, 767 and 77s. So, because this really is originally a McDonnell Douglas aircraft, not a Boeing. That said, there may be issues not only with other things in the sim, like maybe AFCADs, maybe the Navigraph data, maybe there's some issues with it. Maybe, I'm not really sure exactly what was causing that 10-degree offset. But to be honest, I'm not even, I can't tell you whether it's the airplane or anything. But, if I can work through some of those issues and learn the aircraft better, I'll probably enjoy it even more. So I hope you liked what you saw. If you did, please give it a like, and if you haven't already, by all means, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time.